Hello and welcome to Intro to Adobe Illustrator for Biomedical students. Today's workshop is going to consist of two parts. The first half of the workshop will be just an intro to Adobe Illustrator broadly. I'm going to work on the assumption that whoever is watching this tutorial has never even so much as opened the program before. So I'm going to show you how to open up Adobe Illustrator, create a new document, create a new canvas, and then I'm going to cover some of the basic tools within Illustrator. After that, the second half of the workshop will consist of recreating a diagram of an animal cell that I pulled from the internet using the tools that I cover in the first half, as well as a few other little tips and tricks that I probably won't get to in the first half. With that, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is open up Adobe Illustrator. And this is going to look a little different if you're on a Mac, but I'm going to assume you know how to access applications on your device. We'll go ahead, let this initialize, let it load. Groovy. So when you open Illustrator, you're going to be greeted with this screen. If it's your first time opening it, I'm just going to go ahead and X out of this. But if you wanted to, you could see what the new features are in the latest version of Illustrator. All right, so generally when you open Illustrator, this will be the main screen you're greeted with. This is your home screen. Down here, you'll see recent files. If you have any, you can see a few presets here. You can also see the create new and open options. Create new will let you create a new file, a new project. Open will allow you to open old projects. And we're gonna go ahead and hit create new. Note also that these options can be accessed at any time via file in your top navigation bar. All right, after you hit create new, you're gonna be greeted with the new document window. As you can see, there are several different tabs within this window, each representing a different suite of presets common to different platforms. So if you were designing something for a mobile device, you've got a bunch of mobile presets, web presets, and so on and so forth. Go ahead, if you're following along with this, and click on print. Now you'll notice all of your document settings over here on the right. This top one here is what you will name your project. Go ahead and name it something creative. I'm just going to go ahead and call this Adobe Illustrator Biomed Practice. Cool. Next up, you have your width and height, which are pretty self-explanatory. You can see in the points drop down. This is where you'll find your different units of measurement. I'm going to go ahead and work in inches, assuming that's what we're all most familiar with. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick 10 by 10 square. Perfect. Bleed has to do with printing. Artboards is the number of canvases you're going to work with. We're going to keep it to one. Bleed is basically tells... It leaves room for the color to bleed off the edges of the page, which can be useful depending on what your printer does, how it operates. And then in advanced options, the main thing you'll want to worry about is your color mode. If you're designing something for print, whether that's a book or a poster or anything that's going to be printed, you're going to want to work inside of CMYK color. If you are designing something that is specifically and solely for screens, then you're going to want to use RGB color. Raster effects basically just defines how your vectors will be compressed when exporting. Right now it's set to 300 pixels per inch. I'm going to go ahead and set it to 72 pixels per inch. Basically, the higher this is, the better your resolution will be, but the bigger that your file will be, which is why I'm going to keep mine turned down just to sort of conserve space on this computer. We don't need to worry about the rest of these settings. I'm going to go ahead and click create. second. It's been a little slow today. All right, now in order to make sure you can work along with this tutorial easily, you need to make sure your workspace looks like mine. To do this, at the top of your screen, click on Window, Workspace, and then make sure Essentials is checked. If it's not, then click on it. If you do that and it still looks different, then you're going to want to come back up again to Window and choose Workspace, Reset Essentials. And now we all should be working with the same workspace. So before I move on, I'm just going to kind of give a quick overview of this screen you're looking at here. In the middle, this big blank white board, this is your canvas. Over here on the left is your toolbar. Up top is your top navigation bar. And on the right is your properties panel. Really, it's your property, layers, and libraries panel. I'm just going to refer to it as the properties panel for convenience. All right, and now before we dive into covering any basic tools, I'm just going to show you guys a few preliminary things. First off, we're going to want to add a few tools to our toolbar. And in order to do that, we're going to click on the three dots at the very bottom of the toolbar that say Edit Toolbar. And then we'll click and drag the tools that we want into our toolbar. And the ones that we want today are the Add Anchor Point tool and the Delete Anchor Point tool. And I'm going to go ahead and put mine up under my Curvature tool. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and just click out of that. And something else I want to show you guys that we're not really going to be working with today, but it's probably one of the most important things to know inside of Illustrator is how to work with rulers so you can make things precisely. So if you come up to View, come down to Rulers, and then click on Show Rulers. Notice that the shortcut for that is also Control-R or Command-R if you're on a Mac. And then after you have your rulers showing, you can set guides by clicking on your ruler and then dragging, and you'll see this little dotted line up here. And you just release wherever you want your guide to be. And then you can see this little blue line. Now, also when working with guides, you can come up to View, navigate down to Guides, and you can hide your guides at any time, which I believe is Control semicolon, yes, for the shortcut. And you can also lock them. So right now I can select this guide and move it around. But if I were actually working right now and I had a shape that was on top of this guide and I wanted to select, or like a group of shapes, and I just did this, I'd be moving my guide too. So a lot of times you're not going to want to do that. That's when you come up to View, come down to Guides, and choose Lock Guides, which is Alt Control semicolon, and now, oh, relock it, there we go. Can't do anything with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and unlock it, I'm gonna delete it. I'm going to hide the rulers, why not, just because we're not going to be using them. And now we are ready to go. We're ready to get started learning the actual tools, start making things inside of Illustrator. So, oh, I lied. Actually, before I show you the tools, there's a couple of shortcuts that I want to go over very quickly, just because it's going to make this whole process a lot easier. So in order to zoom in and out, the shortcut is Control plus to zoom in, Control minus to zoom out. If you hold spacebar, no matter what tool you're using, you'll see this little hand come up, and then you can hold down spacebar, click and drag to pan around your canvas. And these navigation shortcuts are going to be incredibly useful. The other ones you'll want to be aware of are the undo and redo shortcuts. I use them a lot because I am far from perfect and I make many mistakes in my creative process. And those are just the same as they would be in most programs. So Control Z to undo, Control Shift Z to redo. And now with that, this time we are truly ready to begin creating things. So let's get started. The first tool I'm going to show you guys is the rectangle tool. And you notice you click and hold down on the rectangle tool, there will be a bunch of other tools. I'm going to cover at least one or two more of these throughout the course of this workshop. But for now, let's just focus on the rectangle tool. And I will say that any tool with the little triangle in the bottom right corner is a tool that has a drop-down menu. Okay, so the rectangle tool, there's basically two ways to go about making a rectangle. The first, you can just click anywhere and this little window will pop up and you can specify the dimensions of your rectangle. So this will come in handy if you need to do really precise work. Generally, I use Illustrator for art more than I use it for graphic design or poster design or that sort of thing, even though that's what it's built for. All that is just to say that normally I'm just sort of eyeballing my rectangles, and to do that, you'll click, hold, and drag instead of just clicking. And then you see you can move your mouse around and create the rectangle that you'd like. One good thing to note with this tool and many of the tools, if you hold Shift, you'll get perfect ratios, or if you were using the line tool, it would constrain your movements to 45-degree angles. But you'll notice when holding Shift before I release my mouse, my rectangle is constrained to be a perfect square. I'm gonna go ahead and release that, and now you'll see our square on the screen. If I click away from this square, it would disappear because there's not actually anything there. There's no stroke or no color. So I'm going to show you guys how to fix that. Now there's two ways to go about this. You can either use the stroke and fill icons over here towards the bottom of your toolbar, or you can come over to the properties panel, and what appears in the properties panel is going to change depending on what you have selected. But if you have something like a shape or a path selected, you'll have your fill and stroke options over here. But I'm going to go ahead and use the toolbar icons for now. So if you double click on either of these, then you can set the color. Let's give it a purple stroke. Why not? Cool, and now you can see that our rectangle has sprung into existence, or square, if you will. You'll know over here on the right, you can increase and decrease the size of your stroke. And then let's go ahead and set a fill as well. And you can accomplish that again by clicking over here in your toolbar or over here in your properties panel. And let's make the fill yellow. Keep it real contrasty. I don't like that yellow too much. Let's make it. There we go. That looks good to me. All right, and now we have a square. Perfect. So let's go ahead and look at another shape tool really quickly. I will say the ellipse tool operates the exact same way as the rectangle tool, only you're going to be getting ovals and circles instead of rectangles. But I want to show you the polygon tool. So the polygon tool also sort of works the same way. If you click, you can define the number of sides and the radius, or you can click, hold, and drag to make a polygon. What's really important to note with the polygon tool is that if you, while you're holding down on your mouse before you release it, if you press up or down with your arrow keys, you'll increase or decrease the number of sides of the polygon. I'm going to go ahead and just make a triangle. Cool. All right, now let's assume you need to change something about your polygon, or your rectangle for that matter, but I'm gonna work on the polygon. Let's assume that you don't need a equilateral triangle. Let's assume you need a right triangle, but the polygon tool only lets you work with equilateral triangles. How do you fix this? Well, the way to do it, I'm actually going to go ahead and draw another polygon and hold shift just so my triangle starts out facing a better way. Anyways, how do you edit a shape after it's been drawn? This is where the direct select tool comes into play. It is the second tool in your toolbar. Shortcut is A on the keyboard. And what the direct select tool does is it allows you to move paths and anchor points that you have already created. So you can see with this triangle selected, there's an anchor point at each of the vertices. And if I click on one, then it will be the only one highlighted. You see these two were blue, now they're white. And now I can click and drag this until it's a right triangle. I could also hypothetically click on one of the paths instead of the anchor points, and then I can move the whole path. I'm gonna go ahead, Control Z to undo that. All right, now let's assume that you want to combine your shapes. So to do this, the first thing you'll have to do is move them so that they're actually touching one another. And this is where the move tool comes into play, or the selection tool, pardon me. Shortcut V, probably the most common tool that you're gonna be using just to, move things around. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna move my triangle until its vertex is aligned with the corner of the square. So I make a sort of truck looking shape here. And actually good learning opportunity here while we have our move tool. So you notice if I select two of these at once, we'll have a pathfinder over here in our properties panel. And the pathfinder, alignment first. So alignment basically tells all the shapes that you have selected how they're going to align with one another. So you notice if I went horizontal align left, this moves to the far left. Oh, this moves this to the right. That makes sense. And then can align it at the bottom. There we go. So you can just see we have these alignment tools. I'm just going to go ahead, select just the triangle. Perfect. And now what I'm going to do is once again select both of these. Again, you'll see this pathfinder appear in your properties panel, and this basically allows you to do a number of operations among several shapes. So all I want to do with these is unite them again, like I said, to make sort of a truck shape. And to do that, I'll click on unite, and now I have one shape. Just to sort of showcase another one, let's move this triangle back here, select both, and we could do something like minus front. And now we have this triangle cut out of this square. I'm gonna go ahead and undo that and reunite them. Okay. So let's say you want to make some more complicated shapes than just basic polygons, ovals, rectangles, or stars. I don't know if you saw the star tool in there. How do you go about accomplishing this? Well, this is where the pen tool comes into play. So we're going to go ahead, select our pen tool. It is the third tool from the top of the toolbar. And how the pen tool works is you basically click somewhere to define an origin point. And actually, let's go ahead. Let's come over here, make sure that we have our fill highlighted. Let's turn off the fill. Oh, got to make sure that's not selected. Let's turn off the fill, grab our pen tool. And so yeah, how the pen tool works is basically you click to define an origin point, and then you either click again to draw vertices. And the reason I turned off fill is because this area right here would be automatically filling, and this can get pretty complicated, pretty distracting. So I like to make sure that only a stroke is turned on, and then I go and play with the fill later every time I'm using the pen tool. So again, you click to define an origin point, click to set vertices, or you click, hold, and drag to make curves between points. You'll notice when you do this, your next point will automatically want to continue the curve. But let's say you don't want to continue the curve. What you actually want is to make this a corner and go back to using straight lines. What you'll do is just click on this anchor point right here, and now you're back to using it like normal. I'm gonna go ahead and just finish this shape. So you'll also notice when you get back to your origin point, a little dot will appear, or a little circle will appear by your pen tool, and this just means that you're about to close the shape. All right, so now we have this funky little shape. But let's say that you want to change something about it. You're happy with it broadly, but you need to change some things. So let's grab our direct select tool. Now you're looking here, and really the anchor points that you already have don't allow you the customization that you want. This is where these tools that we added at the beginning come into play. So you have your anchor point tool, your add anchor point tool, and your delete anchor point tool, shortcuts plus and minus. And these, as the name suggests, allow you to add and delete anchor points to and from your path. So now we have all these anchor points, and we have way more customization, way more control over our shape. And again, you can use the minus anchor point tool to get rid of them. All right, so we have a weird little shape going on here. Let's go ahead. Just one thing I didn't show off with the shape. So with the fill, you can do a solid fill, or you can do a gradient fill by clicking on the little gradient icon in your toolbar with the shape selected. And now you can see you can do linear gradients, radial gradients, or you can do a freeform gradient, which allows you to draw the path of the gradient. I'm gonna go ahead, let's do a linear gradient. I think that makes the most sense with this shape. And with your gradient menu, you can double click on any of the sliders. Oh, whoops. And you can change the color of the gradient. Cool. Go ahead. Let's just get rid of the stroke, I think. I like that. All right, so let's say, so now you kind of have an overview of the shape tools. You kind of have an overview of the pen tool when the shape tools aren't enough. But let's say you want to do something more drawerly instead of just clicking and manipulating vectors. This is where your paintbrush and pencil tools come into play. So the paintbrush tool is over here. It's shortcut B. And how it works is you can just click and then drag, and wherever you drag, you're going to draw a path. And what's cool about using this tool in Illustrator, especially as opposed to Photoshop, is that the path that you draw with your paintbrush is actually converted into a vector path that you can manipulate later, which is pretty darn cool if you ask me. A few other things to note with the paintbrush tool. If you use the brackets on your keyboard, you can manipulate the size of the tool. So just left and right brackets, left bracket makes it smaller, right bracket makes it bigger. And then the other thing to note with the paintbrush tool is you can change the brush stroke. You have a lot of different choices of brush strokes. And in order to access those, you have to come up to Window, and you'll open your Brushes window. And now you can see over here a couple of different brush strokes to choose from. Oh, let's deselect this. And so if we use this one, now when I paint, it's gonna be a lot different. What's cool also with the brush tool is you can paint with any of the different brushes and go back and select it later and change the kind of stroke it has, since everything is vector based. And if you want something that's not included here in the default brushes, you can click on this little brush libraries menu, and there's a ton of other things to choose from. Cool. So I think the last thing to note with the brush tool is that its color is defined by its stroke, not its fill properties. So the paintbrush won't use a fill at all. All of its color will be determined by its stroke. You can still use gradients and things like that. I guess depending on the brush, but mostly it's going to be defined by the stroke. Cool. So that does it for our paintbrush tool. Another thing you might want to use is the pencil tool, which is hidden underneath the paintbrush tool. It's in the paintbrush tools dropdown. And the pencil tool operates exactly like the paintbrush tool with a few exceptions. So for one, it only allows you to use one type of brush. Your pencil tool is always just going to be that regular round point brush. You can change your path later by using the brushes library. But when you're drawing, it's always going to default to that stroke. The other cool thing about the pencil as opposed to the paintbrush is it allows you to create closed vector shapes. So with your paintbrush, if you were to start and end at the same origin point, you wouldn't have a closed shape. You would just have two anchor points at that origin point that aren't actually connected. But the pencil tool, if you'll notice, when you get back to your origin point, that circle appears and you can make closed vector paths. All right, so that does it for the paintbrush and pencil tools. And really with the tools I've shown you so far, you can make most things in Illustrator at this point. If you know how to use shape tools, you know how to use the pen tool, you know how to manipulate anchor points, and you know how to use the paintbrush and pencil tools, you can create a lot of things. The one tool you still don't have in your toolkit that you'll definitely need is the text tool. And I guess the eraser tool, but the eraser tool is pretty self-explanatory, you know. What you do have to notice about the eraser tool in this program as compared to, say, Photoshop, is that it creates new anchor points so that everything is still vector-based. Instead of just like erasing pixels, it has to modify the shape by adding new vector points. I'm gonna go ahead and undo all of that erasing. So the other tool that you really need to know is the type tool. And the type tool allows you to add text to your image. So just like with your shape tools, there's two ways to go about it. You can either just click and then start typing. What this does is it creates text that the move tool will actually manipulate its dimensions, right? So you can see now the text is backwards and wider and longer. Go ahead and get rid of it. Or instead of just clicking, you can click, hold, and drag. And now, when you manipulate the text with your move tool, it just manipulates the text box instead of the text itself. When I use the type tool, I almost always create text boxes. Just as a general design rule, you're not really supposed to distort text. So I recommend the click, hold, and drag method. At least when you're getting started, gotta know the rules to break them. So yeah, after you've created some text, you've created your text box, you can manipulate it over in your properties panel. That's where you'll find the different fonts. That's where you can change the size. You can, make it italic, that sort of thing, if those options are available. And you can also change both the fill and the stroke. And then the only other thing I want to note with the text tool, if you do get to the point where you want to manipulate the individual letters as if they were vector shapes, instead of treating the whole thing as just one vector object, you can right click on it. Make sure it's selected. Right click on it and choose create outlines. And now each shape is an outline. It's still group, but if I were to ungroup it, then I could just manipulate each letter individually. Okay, that does it for our type tool. I'm not gonna demonstrate these tools, but I'm just gonna go ahead and note that in the type tools drop-down menu, there is a vertical type tool, which allows you to type downward. And then there's also a type on path tool, which allows you to add text to any existing path, which can be super useful for text wrapping and that sort of thing. And note that wherever you click on the path is where the text starts. Cool. So the last tool I'm going to go over before we get into making our cell is the blend tool. This is where you kind of start to get into a more advanced realm, and we're just going to dip our toes a little bit. But it's a really cool tool, it's a really powerful tool, and I want to show it off. So the blend tool is over here. There it is. It is the square, rounded, rectangle, and circle tool. I think like the third tool from the bottom of your toolbar, shortcut W. And how it works basically is you can just click on one shape, click on another shape, and the program tries to figure out how to blend between the two shapes. I did a pretty terrible job right now, as you can see, but while we have our blend selected, if you come up to Object in your top nav bar, come down to Blend, and then come to Blend Options, you can change the way this blend is going to occur. So let's change from spacing to specified steps. Let's go something like 70, and then we'll hit OK. And now you can see the whole thing blends. Now let's say you want to, so right now if you click anywhere on this blend, you'll just move the whole thing. But let's say you want to move one of the objects involved in the blend. If you double click anywhere in your screen anytime, you'll enter isolation mode, or I guess it has to be on an object. Never mind, pardon me. If you double click on an object, you'll enter isolation mode, and you can see this little gray bar appears. And now I can select this and move it, and the blend is recalculated. Or I can grab this one up here. Same thing. Turn off the stroke. And that, in a nutshell, is the blend tool. Let's say for some reason you needed to be able to manipulate any one of these 70 shapes individually. You can also do that. The way to do that is by clicking on your blend object, choosing object, and going expand appearance. We're going to play with expanding more as we get into talking about the cell, but I'll just show you that that is something you can do. Yeah. Okay. That actually didn't work right, which is strange to me. Anyways, I'm gonna move on. You guys will see what expanding does here in a second. All right, so that's it for the basic tools. Now we're gonna move into the second half of the workshop, which will consist of replicating the animal cell diagram. And I'm just gonna go ahead and click and drag around everything and hit delete. And we're gonna start with a blank canvas. Cool, so let's go about replicating our animal cell. The first thing we want to do to get started on this is pull up the cell reference image so we know what it is we're trying to reproduce. And in order to do that, I'm going to come up to File. I'm going to click on Place. And then I will navigate to the picture it is that I want to place. And I've included a link, a Google Drive link to this image in the description of the tutorial. So if you want to download it to follow along, go ahead, pause the video, follow that link, download the image somewhere to your computer, and then hop back on. Go ahead and grab it. Diagram of an animal cell. Perfect. Two ways to place it. I can either just click and it'll place automatically, or I can click and drag so that it's sized the way I want it to be. And I'm actually going to go ahead and move it off of our canvas over here, just so it's off to the side as something for us to look at. All right, now I'm gonna have to talk for a little bit about layers. We haven't used layers yet, but if you come over to the properties panel, the second tab is layers, and you can see all of the different layers. Layers are pretty key to working with any Adobe program. Really any design software, you just have to get accustomed to using layers. And layer 1, all we're gonna have layer 1B is this reference image. I'm gonna go ahead and lock it. What that does is it makes it impossible. You'll see the little like no-go icon next to any tool that I try to use, because the layer is locked. I can't work on it. I'm also going to double click on the name. This is something you want to get into a good practice with early on, is naming your layers very clearly. Depending on what you're working on, sometimes you'll end up working with, like 75 to 100 layers. And if you're not naming them, it's all just going to be like layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. You're not going to have any idea what's on the layer. This is something I'm really bad at. Something I didn't do a lot when I first got into working with these design programs, and it's something I'm slowly having to unlearn as I improve in my practice. So spare yourself some pain and heartbreak and just name your layers. Just do it. Just name your layers. So we're going to call this one reference. And then we'll go ahead, if you come down at the very bottom of the layers panel, you'll see this little plus icon. If you hover over it, it says create new layer. We'll click on that. We have layer 2. Let's go ahead, just name it right away. And we'll call this base layer. Perfect. All right, so now let's just go ahead and let's draw this overall potato shape of the cell. And we'll do that with our pencil tool. Yes, amazing. So I will say, when you do this, don't include the secretory vesicle quite yet. Just draw a rough potato, just because that'll give us a chance to use our Pathfinder tool and our ellipse tool. So just go ahead and draw the rough potato shape and make sure that it's a closed vector shape. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and just try to replicate the color scheme of this cell, but I encourage you, if you are following along, to use any number of colors. This is a good opportunity for you to be creative with it, to have fun with it, and to make it your own. But me, I'm boring and bland, so I'm just going to take this diagram and run with it. All right, so we have our basic shape set. Let's go ahead and give it a stroke. I'm gonna give it an orange stroke. I'll give it about right there. That looks fine. We'll make it a little bigger. Let's make it a little lighter too. A little prettier color. Perfect. And now let's give it a fill. As you can see, this is kind of a gradient fill. I'm gonna go ahead and just use a radial gradient. I'm gonna set my colors so they're similar to the model. So let's see, we want this and this one, something lighter, not purple though. Perfect. And now we'll want our gradient to kind of resemble where this one falls. The best way to do this would be to do the freeform gradient. I'm just gonna use the radial gradient for ease. And if you click on edit gradient, as I just did, I'll go ahead and open it back up so you can see that. Oh, it's already set to edit gradient, weird. Normally you'd have to click on edit gradient and then the circle would appear. And then you can just click, hold, and drag to draw your gradient wherever you want it. I'm gonna go ahead and put mine about right here. Right there, that looks fine. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make that secretory vesicle. As I said, we're going to use the ellipse tools. Come over to your shape tools, grab the ellipse tool, also shortcut L on your keyboard. It doesn't matter what the stroke and fill of this are, because we're going to get rid of it eventually. But for now, let's draw our secretory vesicle. So click and hold to draw your ellipse, hold shift to make it a circle. And while you're holding down on shift and your key before you release, if you hold spacebar, then you can also move your circle. So again, that's shift to make it a circle, spacebar to move it around. Let's go ahead, put ours about right there. Grab our move tool, select both of them, and then you guessed it, minus front in the Pathfinder. And now we have our secretory vesicle. Amazing. So one thing you'll notice, one difference between the reference and what we have now for sort of the space layer is the sort of the stroke around the stroke on the membrane. How are we going to do that? I'm gonna go ahead and turn this stroke up a little bit. So this is where the expand feature comes into play. What you're gonna wanna do is copy and paste this shape that you have here. There's a couple ways to go about it. You can go up to edit, copy, and then edit, paste. You can also Control C, Control V, the standard copy paste shortcuts. Or if you have your move tool selected, you can hold down Alt and then just click and drag, and it'll make a copy of it. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the fill with our copy. And then I'm gonna put the copy directly over the original. And now you'll notice this copy is just a stroke. So what we can do, if we come up to Object expand, all we want to do is expand the stroke, not the fill. So let's click off fill and hit OK. And now you'll notice if I use my direct select tool, this stroke has anchor points around both sides, which it didn't before. I'll go ahead, Control Z. You can see it's just one path of anchor points. Control Shift Z after the expansion. Boom, a whole shape. So now this shape has both a stroke and a fill. You can see that our stroke became our fill. So if I go over to the stroke and I darken it a bit, now we have that stroke, that stroked stroke effect. Perfect. All right, so that does it for our base layer. So let's go ahead, let's come over to our layers. Let's lock our base layer so we can't do anything to it anymore. We'll create a new layer. And let's call this layer Nucleus. All right, so for our nucleus, it's pretty easy to get started. Let's go ahead, let's make a big circle for our nucleus. And let's go ahead, get rid of the stroke. Change the color to be closer to the model. That's good. And then we'll make a smaller circle for the nucleolus. We'll go ahead, change that color a little bit. There we go. Perfect. All right, and then all that we really have left to do is draw the chromatin. So let's go ahead and use the paintbrush tool for this. Hit it under our pencil tool. Let's make sure we're set to the round brush. Let's make it a little smaller with our brackets. And then let's set the stroke color, something like that. Let's make it a little smaller still. And then we can just scribble in some chromatin. We'll go ahead and add, oh, there's not enough contrast there. Add 2 different color strands, that'll work. Oh, try to stay inside the lines, why don't I? Okay, so now you'll notice a problem here. The chromatin is over the top of our nucleolus, even though in the diagram it's clearly behind it. How do we fix this? So you can see, not only do we have our layers over here, and you'll notice whichever layer is on top is the layer that appears. So if I move the base layer above the nucleus disappears. Move the nucleus back to the top. But then within each layer, there's also sub-layers consisting of all the shapes within that layer. And you'll notice this nucleolus is underneath these chromatin paths. And we could rename these too if we wanted to. I'm not going to do that. That seems like overkill. So you could just click and drag until this is at the top of your layer, like so. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Or the better way that you should get used to working in Illustrator is either right-clicking and going to Arrange, bring to front, or you can use Control and your brackets. Oh, let's make sure it's selected to change the order that it appears. I'm gonna go ahead, keep it in the front. Cool. All right, and that does it for our nucleus layer. So let's go ahead, let's lock the nucleus. Let's make a new layer. Double click on the name, and we will call this one endoplasmic reticulum. Cool. So the first thing you'll want to do to create this endoplasmic reticulum is make a circle slightly larger than your nucleus. And let's go ahead, let's make sure our fill is set to off. Actually, let's just inverse these. There we go. And we'll make the stroke a little darker purple. Perfect. So now again, by clicking, holding shift and using spacebar, I'm just going to kind of position this around our nucleus. Looks like it's going to be a little bit smaller. There we go. Let's make that stroke a little bigger. All right, and now let's make the color a little bit brighter. There we go. Cool. So now what we're going to do is basically create a series of increasing circles, a series of increasingly sized circles around this first one. So let's just go ahead. Let's select our current circle. We'll hold down Alt, and we'll click, drag, make a new one. Let's expand it. We'll hold down Shift if we want it to stay a circle as we transform it. And then let's go ahead and copy this circle. Notice I'm not worrying about placement quite yet. Go ahead and make this one a little bit bigger. Go ahead, copy this one, make it a little bit bigger. And now what we can do is select all of our circles by clicking and dragging around them, coming to align, aligning them horizontally and vertically. And now, look at that. And it looks like we will actually have to make these ones a little bit smaller. So I'm gonna go ahead, grab these three, again, hold down Shift, and we'll realign them one more time. Move it back around our nucleus. That's still touching the edge, and that's gonna drive me crazy. So I'm gonna go ahead, unlock the nucleus, and we'll just move everything over a little bit. Perfect. Lock that back up. Okay. So now that we have our circles, we'll want to have these sort of paths that you see in the endoplasmic reticulum between them, right here. So what we're going to do is use our add and delete anchor point tools to break these paths. So I'm going to add an anchor point here, an anchor point here, one in the middle, and then I'm going to delete the one I created. Let's go an anchor point here, here, delete. And you can see I'm just kind of opening up this endoplasmic reticulum sporadically by adding and deleting anchor points. Cool. Let's go, let's give it one more somewhere for good measure. Awesome. So, once again, you'll notice we have this sort of stroked effect. So we're gonna have to select everything. And we will want to, once again, and let's actually turn up the stroke a little bit more. 7 looks good. We can also, this is a good time to know, we're going to play with this a lot more, but if we don't want these paths to be rectangular, we can click on the word stroke and properties panel and give them round caps. Look at that. And we're going to come back to this here in a second, but just a cool thing to note. So now, again, once again, we want that stroked effect. So we're going to come up to Object. We're going to go Expand. Once again, just the stroke. And then we're we're gonna give all of these a slightly darker stroke. And now you can see, once again, we have that stroke effect. Turn it up just a little more so you can see it. Beautiful. So now what we need to do is combine each layer. You'll notice over here you sort of have the broken circles, but you also have bridges between them. And we're just going to do that by using our ellipse tool. And we can just zoom in, start clicking and dragging little bridges randomly. And we can use our move tool to, rotate them as we need. Put one here. Let's put one here. Put one here. Again, V. All right, now we have these bridges, and we're going to want to integrate them so that it's all one continuous shape. I think everything is bridged. You're going to want to make sure there's a bridge to all the different segments. I think mine looks pretty good. So you'll go ahead, you'll select everything in your layer. Once again, come over to your handy dandy Pathfinder, click Unite, and now look at that. Perfect. This one got a little messed up. We're gonna have to make it a bit bigger. And then I'll try that again. Okay. Unite. Oh, much better. All right. And now we've expanded our shape. We've given it a stroke effect, but we still have one problem, and that is the ribosomes, these little dots. How are we going to get these little dots on there? Now, once again, we're gonna have to copy and paste this shape. So let's go ahead, alt click on it, drag, make a new one. We can turn the fill off. And then the stroke, you want to come back over to your stroke and the properties panel again, like we just did to make our strokes rounded. We'll turn on dashed line. Once again, we're going to make our caps rounded. And then we have to play with these features here to get our ribosomes the way we want them. I think, if I recall correctly, that 4 points, oh, no, maybe 2 points is a perfect circle. And then the gap, let's do something like 12. Cool, and then we have a whole little stream of ribosomes. And we can just click and drag that until it's perfectly aligned with our original layer. Oh, looks like we're gonna have to turn up the stroke so we can actually see them. Oh, never mind. What's going on here? So let's turn these little suckers up. Place it on here. There we go. Now we have our ribosomed endoplasmic reticulum. Beautiful. So let's go ahead, come back over to layers. Let's lock our endoplasmic reticulum layer. Let's create a new layer and we'll call it centrosome. All right, so for the centrosome, this is where we're going to get a chance to use our blend tool. And we're going to come up to our shape tool. We're going to choose our star tool. And we are just going to make a little star somewhere. Let me go ahead and set my stroke and fill. It looks like the fill is like a really pale orange. Or the stroke. Nope, the fill. And then, so yeah, that should be the fill. And the stroke will be something a bit darker. That looks good. All right, so now with our star tool, let's go ahead, do something like that. Looks pretty good. Oh, we're gonna have to come back over to our stroke, turn off dashed line, and now we have a regular stroke again. And what we can do here, so we get the rounded edges like we have in our model, is if we grab our direct select tool, you'll notice that with our anchor points, we also have these little rounding tools. So if I click on any of these little dots, not the anchor points, but the other dots, and click and use them to round my star. Look at that. And now what we want to do is copy this, move the copy a little ways away, and then use our blend tool to blend them. And let's go ahead, come up to our blend options, and reverse the spine so that this one's in front. Perfect. I think we can also probably turn down the number of steps. Let's try half as many. That doesn't look as good. We'll keep it at 70. And just like that, we have our centrosome. So again, we just made a star, we copied it, we pasted it, and we blended the two, and we're good to go. If you want, you can also put an ellipse in the center of it for good measure. Let's go ahead and boop. Cool. And now we have our centrosome. Amazing. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's lock our centrosome layer. Let's create a new layer. And we will call this one mitochondria. And this should be a pretty straightforward, simple layer. I just included it so we could get a chance to use our pen tool and our pencil tool. So let's use the pencil tool, or the pen tool, pardon me, to draw the outside of the mitochondria. And it looks like this. We'll have a pretty dark stroke. Orange innards, that looks good to me. And we can just sort of something like that. We can grab our pencil tool and let's see. Looks like the same stroke, but yellow. Oh, whoops. Gotta deselect that first. Pencil, and now we can draw the little things inside of the mitochondria. Oh, but I don't know why I changed that. There we go. Let's make some funky little things, whatever they are. All right. And now we have our mitochondria. And that pretty much does it for drawing the cell itself. Obviously you could do a lot of these other little shapes just using the tools that I've already shown you, but that seems a bit redundant. So at this point, the last thing I want to show you guys is how to make labels. Let's use our type tool. So go ahead, create a new layer. We'll call it labels. We'll grab our type tool. And now we can name things. So I just went ahead with the type tool, wrote nucleus. And then one shape tool that we haven't used yet is the line segment tool. And you just click where you want your origin point, drag and release. Go ahead and give it a stroke. Make it black. And now we have a line. And our nucleus is labeled. Let's say we want it to be a little better. Once more, we can come over to our stroke options. You can see arrowheads right here. Oh, that's the wrong side. But if you wanted to, you can always add an arrow. And basically wash, rinse, repeat for all of the other objects inside of your cell until the whole thing is labeled. And that does it. And that concludes our workshop. I've shown you the tools. We made a cell. Let's say you're really happy with your cell and you want to save it. That's the last thing we have to cover. So whenever I save, there's really two different ways that you have to save it. So the first, we'll go save as. We already named it, so that's fine. So you always want to save your projects as an Adobe Illustrator file. What this does is it preserves all of your layers. All this is good, don't worry about it. It preserves your layers, it preserves your project, so if you need to come back and work on it later, you can come back and work on it later, and everything's going to be there and everything's going to be arranged the way it was the last time you saw it. The downside to an Adobe Illustrator file is that you can't actually use this anywhere. You can print straight from Illustrator if this is going to print, but let's say you need to upload your image to the web or transfer it to a different non-Adobe program. You would need a JPEG or a PDF or a PNG file. Some of those are going to be found under export as, but Illustrator is configured pretty well. And it's PDFs. Oh, I thought PNGs were here too. So you can save as a PDF. Let me backtrack. We actually are going to go export as. And here's where you can get like a JPEG or a PNG. And when you export as a PNG, the cool thing about exporting as a PNG is that, if we wanted to export this properly, we would need to turn off our reference layer. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the eye icon. Now that's invisible. Now, let's export it as a PNG. And again, the cool thing with PNGs is that your background color can be transparent. So if you needed to make a little icon that you slapped somewhere else without having that white background, that's an option. You can also turn on the white background before you export it. But I'm just going to keep this set to transparent, keep the resolution the same. Okay. And now you can see we have our AI file here and our PNG file here, and we are good to go. And that, my friends, does it for the intro to Adobe Illustrator / Biomedical workshop. If you found this tutorial on our LibGuides or on YouTube, feel free to contact me with any questions you have about Illustrator. My email is tthomp51@uwyo.edu. You can also contact my boss, Susan, for any questions about Adobe software or other software that we offer here in Studio Co. Her email is sschulz7@uwyo.edu. That's sschulz7@uwyo.edu. And yeah, thus concludes the workshop. Thank you so much for attending.